Hey everybody, welcome on back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Hope everybody had a great weekend as we are here on a Monday night talking about a few things here tonight. Before we go ahead and get in, I just want to, of course, thank you guys for tuning in to the show. We're brought to you, of course, by the GSMC Sports Network. We have a great show for you today. We'll be covering the top 5 coaches of all time as well as top 5 dynasties of all time. And make sure that you stick around for later in the show, and we're going to be talking a little bit of college football. And there's a certain topic that came up a few days ago raised by Deion Sanders in regards to spring games. So we're going to talk a little bit about that later on in the show. But before we get started, I would like to ask that you guys like and follow the show, as always. If you got a question during the show that you want to share or just a comment that you want to share, definitely type that into the Super Chat. Your input is a big part of what makes this show great, and we thrive on your energy and your insight. So whether it's a quick comment, a thoughtful question, or just an opinion that you want to share, don't hesitate to drop it in the chat. Now, if you want to make absolutely sure that your message stands out and gets featured on the show, there's an easy way to do that. You can just hit the Super Chat feature and just click the $sign at the bottom of the chat box to send in your Super Chat. This guarantees that your message gets on the air, and it's also a fantastic way to support our channel. So we rely on your support to keep bringing you the sports content that you love, and we appreciate every single bit of it. So go ahead, let us know what you're thinking, hit that Super Chat button, and let's keep this show interactive and exciting. And if you prefer, you can also go to the GSMCSports.net website to tip, donate, and leave a comment or a question there. We couldn't do what we do without your amazing support, so we're so thankful to have you guys as part of our community. And once again, that link is GSMCpodcast.net. All right, so let's go ahead and get into our segment here. As everybody, I'm sure, is very much looking forward to, I'm going to be talking a little bit about Aaron Rodgers and basically what is necessarily going on with the holdup here with this whole process. He's still, of course, making his decision. He met with the Steelers over the weekend, or on Friday, I believe it was, and sources told reporters that he was there for about 6 hours, met with some Steelers brass like Art Rooney, Omar Khan, Mike Tomlin, of course, and he also met with offensive coordinator Arthur Smith for a little while as well. No deal is in place right now, although they did offer one. Just no decision has been made as of yet. So there's no real movement in terms of Aaron Rodgers because he's been pretty silent in this whole process. We haven't heard anything from him, just seen a couple pictures of him at the beach. That's pretty much it. He hasn't even made any appearances on the Pat McAfee show, which he usually is a regular every Tuesday on that show, but he hasn't appeared there yet, still making his decision. And it's basically coming down to either the Steelers or retirement, essentially. Don't think the Giants are going to end up with Aaron Rodgers when it's all said and done. They just signed Jameis Winston over the weekend to basically a backup contract. So it seems like they will either try and get Russell Wilson, or they're most likely going to try and draft a guy and just have Jameis there as, the guy to basically have him start, I'm assuming, or, maybe they start the young guy depending on who they get. But we'll see when the draft comes in terms of that. But in terms of Aaron Rodgers, I'm just wondering what exactly is the holdup, and why I asked that question is not just to completely bash Aaron Rodgers or anything like that, but if you take a step back and just kind of look at his whole situation in general, he's a Super Bowl winner, 4-time MVP. He's accomplished a lot in the NFL, has a lot of passing records and all that. So I'm just kind of wondering what exactly it is that he wants out of this potential final year in the NFL, because he could say that he wants a Super Bowl, but to be honest, and I think if you ask a lot of people in just the NFL community, fan bases, analysts, things like that, most people would say that even if Rodgers signs with the Steelers, they're not a Super Bowl team. I'm a Steelers fan, and I believe that they're not a Super Bowl team with Aaron Rodgers in the lineup. Maybe he could have some better success than Russell Wilson did, at least towards the end of the season, because Russell Wilson was overall pretty solid for the Steelers, apart from those final 5 games, and he was by all means not the only reason why they lost those 5 games and struggled so much. There were a lot of other factors that went into that, but Russ was definitely not great. He wasn't terrible, but he definitely was not spectacular either. And so that's kind of, that 5-game losing streak kind of set this whole, nonsense in motion of them, potentially trying to wind up with Aaron Rodgers. They didn't like the decision to start Russell Wilson that Mike Tomlin made in the middle of the season. There were a lot of people in that building that did not like that decision. That's why you heard Mike Tomlin in the press conference say that he was the lone wolf in the room. He was the only one who wanted it. And when Russell Wilson started out 3-0, having success, Mike Tomlin started to feel good about himself, and you started to hear him, in press conferences saying things like, "That's why I'm well compensated," and all of that, because things were going well. But then, the cracks started to show as the season went along, and that ended up, of course, 10-3 start ended up in a 10-7 record and a blowout loss in the playoffs. Not to mention, every one of the 5 games that they lost, with maybe the exception of the Cincinnati game, were all blowouts. The Cincinnati game, even though it was not technically a blowout in terms of the scoreline, the Bengals dominated that game, and it really could have been a lot worse than what it was at the end of the day. But, so that kind of set the whole motion on why the Steelers even tried to pursue Aaron Rodgers, because I think they knew that they were not going to bring back Russell Wilson, and I believe that their original plan was to bring back Justin Fields, but a combination of, I think, Justin Fields not trusting the organization that he was going to get a fair shot at quarterback, and the Jets offering him more money at the end of the day, more guaranteed money. That just basically led to Justin Fields getting away from the Steelers, and now they're in this situation where they're waiting on a 42-year-old quarterback to make a decision, and if he doesn't, then I would assume they would draft the guy in the NFL draft. I'm not sure if they would go first round or not, just because, there are a lot of other needs on this team, and really the year to get a franchise quarterback would ideally be next year. So I think a lot of the whole mindset or the whole thought process of this whole mess with Aaron Rodgers is they want to basically have a home run shot to try and win a Super Bowl with Aaron Rodgers, or at the very least win a playoff game, which is sad that the standards have gotten to the point where they're just hoping to win a playoff game. But that seems like what this move screams at you, is they're just trying to win a playoff game, because you're not winning a Super Bowl with this version of Aaron Rodgers, not with 42-year-old Aaron Rodgers. 10 years ago, hell, 5 years ago even, yeah, you could probably make that argument that Aaron Rodgers could still lead a team to the Super Bowl, but not now, not after an Achilles injury, not after 2 bad years with the Jets, and 42 years old. Whether, I don't really care much how good he was in the past, because right now 42-year-old Rodgers doesn't do anything for you as an organization. And for Rodgers himself, I just don't really understand what his goal is here. What's his end game? Like, what is he looking for in the Steelers or in any team? Because the only 2 teams that are seriously being considered are the Giants and the Steelers, and I think everybody would agree that neither the Giants or the Steelers are a Super Bowl team or are a quarterback away from a Super Bowl run. So what is Aaron Rodgers' plan? Like, what is it that he wants out of this? If it truly is a Super Bowl, then I don't think it's in the cards, and I think he should just retire. If he's just looking to just play one more year just because he's a competitor and he just wants to play one more year, then I can almost make the argument for, fine, if I'm a Steeler fan, sign him because you're going to get your franchise guy next year, if that's the goal. I don't like it, but that's kind of where we stand right now. I think the Steelers are ultimately going to try and look for their franchise quarterback in next year's draft, when the draft just so happens to be in Pittsburgh, which is the first time that has ever happened. So what better year to get your, essentially replacement for Ben Roethlisberger in the NFL draft that is being held in Pittsburgh. It's a perfect story, so maybe they're looking at that. Plus, the next year's quarterback class just so happens to be very, very good if all, scouting things are to be true and to be believed. There's guys like Arch Manning, there's Drew Aller from Penn State, there's Cade Klubnik. There's a bunch of other guys, that they could, look at possibly drafting, and maybe they have to, move up in the draft to get their guy, because if they sign Aaron Rodgers, it's just going to get them to another 9-8, 10-7 record, and maybe you squeak into the wild card round, but I don't think you go much further than that. Maybe you could make the argument Rodgers could win a playoff game, but it also depends on who they play and depends on where they have to travel. If they have to travel to, say, Buffalo or Kansas City or something like that, or Baltimore, I don't know. I don't think that, I don't think they would do very well in the playoffs. Plus, Steeler teams tend to always get worn down towards the end of the year anyway. So I just think that it's not going to end where Rodgers wants it to. He's not going to go out on the top of the mountain winning a Super Bowl in his final season. He's just not. Unless he wants to be the backup for Kansas City, he's not going to end his career with a Super Bowl, or the backup for Philadelphia, or any of those real Super Bowl contenders that are out there, not the Steelers, who were fake contenders last year and are not even in the conversation this year in terms of being contenders. And that's from a Steelers fan. So I feel like I am a very big Steelers fan, but I'm also a harsh critic when it comes to them. And a lot of Steeler fans feel the same way that I do about Aaron Rodgers. And that's the other reason why. Like, why would you want to come to Pittsburgh when I know he has to know that most fans don't want him there? And I know the ownership has to know that most fans don't want him there. So I don't really understand why this whole process is even happening. They need a quarterback, sure, but you've got Mason Rudolph. Just roll with him for a year, and maybe you draft a guy in the third or fourth round, and see what you might have with him, or maybe you trade for Joe Milton. I know that's been floated around a little bit as the weeks have gone on. Don't know if they'll actually do that. I know it's been kind of picking up a little bit of steam over the past few days or so with this whole quarterback nonsense, but the other thing is the Steelers did give Rodgers a soft deadline, and that is April 21st, and that is just a few days before the NFL draft. So that's their so-called deadline. I believe that they'd probably be willing to wait longer because they called it a soft deadline. I think that's plenty of time for him to make up his mind. I feel like if that is truly your deadline, if he doesn't have an answer for you, you got to move on. You can't just be like, okay, well, let's wait a couple more days and see if maybe he changes his mind in a couple more days. Like, no. If he doesn't have an answer by then, or before then preferably, but if he doesn't have an answer by then you got to move on. He's not the answer to begin with. The Steelers just need to bite the bullet and just accept the fact that this year is going to be a transitional year. They're not going to compete for a Super Bowl. They're probably not going to win a playoff game. They'll be lucky to even get in the playoffs, because I feel like the Bengals will be better, and the Ravens, of course, are the class of that division still. So, at this point, Aaron Rodgers, just, make a decision. This isn't a big, it's not a big, huge, you're not going to win a Super Bowl in Pittsburgh. So, he's a smart guy. I'm sure he knows that. So, I don't know. I mean, I just feel like this is just being drawn out and drawn out and drawn out. And it doesn't need to be. Just make a decision and let us move on. Whether it's with the Steelers, it's like what Cam Hayward says. Even if you want to be a Steeler, or you want to be a Steeler or not, that's the pitch. Like what Cam Hayward said. You want to be a Steeler or not. It's that simple. And if he has to think about it, what Mike Tomlin always says, I want volunteers, not hostages. Well, he doesn't sound like much of a volunteer right now. So, all right, well, we're going to get into the rest of our show, but before we do that, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back, and we're going to get into some history. It's going to be kind of a historical sort of show today. It's a slow, NFL news portion of the offseason, so coming up with some different topics here. But when we come back, we're going to be talking about the top 5 NFL dynasties of all time. So just stick with us. We will be right back.